Hi, it's Corrine. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm making 4 different handmade cards, and for all 4 of them, I'm using the Climbing Cosmos layering stencil by the ton. This is the first time I've used a stencil by this company, and I was really impressed with their stencils. So this specific one comes with 4 different layering stencils. They are all etched, and they also have instructions on them like a lot of the companies are doing now. So again, this is the Climbing Cosmos, and look how beautiful this image is. I had to have this once I saw it. I pulled out a piece of 80-pound hammer mill cardstock because that is very smooth cardstock, easy to blend with. And here I'll try and give you a look at their instructions. So it even tells you on this one, first petal, layer stencil, light. It tells you to do light, medium, dark. And then also for the leaves as well. And of course, they're just trying to give you or be helpful with a color palette, but you can do whatever color palette. Speaking of color palettes, I pulled out some Distress Oxides. I pulled out Stormy Sky, Faded Jeans, and Chip Sapphire. And this is just an absolutely beautiful, it turns out so beautiful on this hammer mill cardstock. I'm using a large blending brush. I will use a more detailed blending brush for my 3rd layer and for my leaves. But look at how pretty this turned out. I started out making 1 card, but it turned out so pretty, I just kept stenciling. That's how I ended up with 4 cards. So I'm going a little bit heavier handed for the 2nd layer, and same with the 3rd layer. Using a smaller brush, it makes it a little bit easier to get into those finer details of the stencil. And then for the centers, I used Distress Oxide Squeeze Lemonade, and it has a 2nd stencil to the inside of the flowers. I used Concord and 9th. I'm trying to remember here what I used. Stardust. And once this dries back, it just turns out so smooth. I used peeled paint and crushed olive. I did a light coat of crushed olive and then went back and deepened it with the peeled paint, Distress Oxide. I decided that wasn't deep enough, so I did take Concord and 9th Artichoke. That's probably one of my favorite greens. And again, here's a closer look. I did 2 of them similar, the artichoke, and then I also did pink and Altenew blues, the 3 different blues. If you would like to know the other color palettes, just let me know and I'll leave it in the description box. So for this first card, I pulled out a large circle die and I pulled out a nesting circle die. These are both from Recollections, which is Michael's brand. And I'm using some silver glitter paper that I had in my stash. This I had to run through a few times with a metal shim as well because it is a little bit thicker paper, but it does cut out nicely. If there's any frayed edges, you can just cut those off. So now I'm using that nesting circle die. I think I went 2 sizes down to cut out my focal piece. I'm using an A6 size white card base from 100-pound hammer mill cardstock, and I decided I wanted to add a stencil. So I'm using this Quirky Stripe stencil by Concord and 9th and pulled out some Distress Oxide and weathered wood. This turned out really pretty. The colors for the focal piece on that blue stencil, I just looked them up. They're by Altenew. They're crisp dye inks, and I used 3 colors: Dewdrops, Teal Cave and Galactic Stream. So I'm going to add this to the front of my card base, and I'm using my scoreboard just to kind of get it in that corner, and I did use double-sided tape to help me line it up. Adhered that down, and I also like to add a little bit of wet glue in the center. So now I want to layer my focal piece onto that silver cardstock or silver glitter paper. So for that, I'm adding some Beacon Fabri-Tac glue. I feel like going onto that glittery paper, it holds very well. And now I just kind of marked where I thought I wanted to cut it off, and I'm adding some foam tape to the back. I did want it to have a little bit of dimension. So using a Kathy Zielske trick, I'm adding a little bit of wet glue to the foam adhesive, which does give you time to kind of get it in place. And then I'll use some sharp scissors and cut the excess off. I pulled out some pre-made sentiments that I had and just kind of went through them. I wasn't sure, this card wasn't for anyone in particular, but I always like to have birthday cards on hand. I also like to have hello cards, hugs cards, and definitely thank you cards. So for this one, I had a thanks that had that same silver glitter paper in the center. And I love the black shadow. The black shadow piece has 3 layers, so it gives it a little bit of dimension as well. I pulled out some iridescent dewdrops. In the light, when these catch the light, they're so pretty. I've been using these a lot lately, and they come in different sizes. So I use the medium and small. And having my glue in a fine tip bottle and a jewel picker really does help to add small items like that. So moving on to the next card. For my colors, I started out with Ballet Slipper by Concord in 9th, but I deepened that with Kitsch Flamingo Distress Oxide. And then I also used Wildberry and to deepen that up. And then I used the peeled paint and crushed olive for the leaves. I used a Spellbinders rectangle die, cut that out. Then I sent it through with a background die. It's by Pink Fresh Studio. It's called Chevron. I went ahead and used some low tack tape to keep it all together. And I cut out another of that Chevron Pink Fresh Studio die, actually 2, from the same 80-pound hammer mill cardstock, because I'm going to add the cardstock to the pieces, to the entire back of that stenciled panel. And then I go back, I don't believe that I actually show it on film, but every other one of the stripes, I add a 3rd piece too. So it has a little bit different levels of dimension. And at the end of this video, I'll give you a closer look of the finished card. I really hope it picks it up because it turned out so pretty. So I'm just using that same Barely Art glue and taking it piece by piece, putting it under a paperweight to hold it down. And then I actually started with like the 4th piece down, I want to say, glued that down, and then went back and did all the pieces above it, just kind of butting them up to each other and gluing them. It does not turn out perfect on the card base, but I knew I was cutting that down. So I went to my heavy trimmer and cut off a little bit from each edge to make it a perfect edge. And by the way, I did glue all of that down onto another piece of cardstock. So I pulled out this Heidi Swapp glitter paper, and I'm using the white glitter. It is so pretty. It's got to be like 20-pound paper. It's like copy weight paper. I've never used this before. It's really pretty, and the glitter does come off slightly. Not too bad, not to where I didn't want to still work with it. I love how this looked behind it. I thought about going with silver glitter, but when I came across this white glitter, I had to use it. So as this card came together, I thought this would be perfect to send to my aunt. So I thought about using the thanks, making a thank you card. But once I decided that this would be a perfect card for her, I was trying to decide between hugs or hello. I cut out the hello with that same white glitter paper, but I didn't love how it looked. I did off screen finish gluing it all together so I could throw it in my pre-made sentiments. That way I could use it on another project. So I ended up with the black shadow piece, a few of them. I usually glue 2 plus, well, I usually glue 3. So I have 3 of the black shadow piece and then a white hugs. And I stamped on the inside. This turned out really pretty. This is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card. So it's an A2 standard card, and it says, I just wanted to send happy thoughts your way. Added a pink heart, I believe it's carnation, that I had in my stash already cut out to add to the inside sentiment. And now I'm pulling out some enamel dots, trying to figure out what I wanted. I did want to add one of those black hearts to it. So what I ended up using is just one of the black hearts, and then I used the clear dewdrops. I use the black heart as kind of like a period to the word. And then again, using my jewel picker, added a few of the clear dewdrops to it. I love how they take on the color of whatever's behind them. And I used a really pretty yellow cardstock that I had in my stash that matches the center flowers to make a handmade envelope. Also, I added a pink heart to the outside of the envelope as well. So now moving on to the other blue stenciled piece, I put 2 Spellbinders rectangle dies together, ran them through, and cut out some rose gold foil cardstock and also champagne gold foil cardstock by Concord and 9th. I end up not using the frame of the rose gold, but I do use that champagne gold. So I cut both of those out. And for the gold piece, I did cut out, or glue together rather, 3 more pieces of the frame, so it gives it a little bit of dimension. But I'm going to set that card aside. I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I'll set that one aside and work on this one on the right. Here's where I decided I'm going to cut a smaller rectangle from the center piece and place some foil behind it. I happen to have this rose gold piece in my scraps. I think it was from the center of that frame that I cut out, so it worked perfect behind it. Making a card base for it, I'm using some white Hammermill cardstock, 100 pound, scoring that. I do end up not using the white card base, so I'll just save that for later. I ended up using a black card base, and the card size is 4 1/2 by 5 7/8. So here I was just kind of going back and forth deciding if I wanted the white card base or the black, but I really like the pop of black. I want to add a little dimension behind that foil piece, so I'm using some really heavy scrap pieces of cardstock that I had. They're 120 pound. I added 3 pieces behind the foil cardstock. And I pulled out an Altenew stamp that says Adore You, stamped it directly onto the card base, but you'll see that I changed my mind with that a little bit later. I'm just using some VersaFine Nocturne Clair ink and some double-sided tape to adhere that onto the foil. Again, I didn't want to use wet glue for that. I thought it would just be a little bit messy. So now I'm going to adhere down my frame piece and then my dimensional layered piece behind that foil. It looks really pretty in person, and I did add a white card base to the center of the inside of the card to make it easier to put my sentiment on. So here's where I changed my mind. I went ahead and used my powder tool and some black cardstock. I stamped the same sentiment, the Adore You, with Versamark ink, and I used some Hero Arts fine detail white embossing powder and heat set that. Then I will cut that out with the coordinating die. It leaves a nice little shadow, and I did cut 2 others, so I have 3 of them adhered together. Gives it just a nice little bit of dimension. I just put that white piece of cardstock down, hoping it's a little bit easier to see when I'm working with a black card base. So that'll just adhere right over my stamp sentiment. And again, behind that foil, there's a little bit of dimension because of those 3 pieces of thick cardstock. I was really happy with how that turned out. So again, deciding on how I wanted to embellish it, I went ahead and used the black clay hearts, and I added 3 of them. I added 2 above the sentiment and 1 at the end of the sentiment. I will give you a closer look of all these cards at the end. So now I'm working on my last card. This is the gold, champagne gold foil by Concord & Ninth. I went ahead and used it as a frame piece, a little bit smaller than the focal point. So as mentioned earlier, I cut out 3 other frames. I'm gluing those together, and then I will glue the gold foil on the top. This finished card size ends up being an A2, a US A2 sized card. And I like that little, the frame being a little bit smaller than my main piece. I will add dimension behind that piece as well. So I added 3 pieces of thick cardstock behind it. Sometimes I use foam tape. Other times, if I have card stock scraps, I prefer to use those. I think it holds up really well in the mail. And I send a lot of cards out. I used Beacon Fabri-Tac, gave those a minute to dry, and then used the same glue to add my frame on. And again, I'll set some paper weights on those to give them a chance to dry. So I pulled out Wings and Petals All to New, this beautiful happy birthday sentiment. Again, treated my paper with my anti-static powder tool, used my Versamark ink, and then used the same white detail embossing powder. I allowed my heat gun to get really hot and then embossed it. These also have coordinating dies with the sentiments. I purposely looked through my stash to find a sentiment with a coordinating die so I could add it to the front of the card and give it a little bit of dimension as well by gluing 2 other pieces behind it. So using my magnets, I'll hold that in place while I glue it down. Added my main panel and then just kind of lined up where I wanted the happy birthday and glued that down. For the inside, I used the same All to New Wings and Petals and stamped out a big birthday hug for you. So pretty. And to embellish it, I pulled out several things, but what I decided on were these gorgeous Teresa Collins enamel dots. The green ended up being the perfect match for that peeled paint that I have on the leaves. I guess they're not really leaves. I guess they're more stems. So I added 5 of those in total. Here's a closer look at all the cards. I hope you can see the dimension behind them, and that, look at that, how pretty that Concord & Ninth foil cardstock is. That's the rose gold. There's the dimension behind it with the thick cardstock, and then a little bit of dimension behind the Adore You. I love the black clay hearts, how they tie in with the black card base, and the continuous pattern of that stenciled on the front of the card. Again, I didn't finish the inside of this card besides putting a white piece of cardstock. Same with this one, I did not finish the inside. So again, with this one, I used that stenciled background, some circle nesting dies. I happen to have this Thanks in my stash of pre-made labels. I believe that's a honeybee die cut with the shadow. And I use these gorgeous iridescent dewdrops. I'm trying to give you a better look to see when the light hits them, how pretty those are. This happy birthday one is really pretty. I like how the enamel dots match perfectly. And as you can see on most of my cards, I do like to add a little bit of dimension. So I added a little bit of dimension behind that happy birthday sentiment. And lastly, stamping the inside with that really pretty coordinating sentiment I thought was the perfect touch. This pink card is probably my favorite. Again, this is going to my aunt. I used some clear dewdrops for this one. The Hugs is a honeybee stamp, and that white glitter cardstock by Heidi Swap is just perfect behind it. And here I'm trying to give you a closer look to show how every other one of those chevron pieces, I added a little bit more dimension behind, so it gives it a nice layered look. I used the white for the inside of the Hugs. I added that clay heart and the clear dewdrops. So I hope you've enjoyed the process of these 4 cards come together. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram under CorenesCreations. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I hope you have a great day.